Okay, so welcome everyone to this month's meeting of the Cybersecurity and Privacy Working Group for In the House. I'm Chris Colvin. I'm the founder of In the House. I'm here with the co-chair of the Cybersecurity and Privacy Working Group, David Heckler, who's also the editor-in-chief of Cyber Insecurity News, who sponsors this monthly webcast. We often have guests that are leaders in the cybersecurity and privacy worlds. And we're really delighted today to have Rita Heimes, who is the General Counsel, Research Director, and Data Protection Officer at IAPP, the International Association of Privacy Professionals. This is an amazing organization that has been growing by leaps and bounds over the last few years and has become a really important player internationally in the privacy and cybersecurity worlds. So I'd now like to introduce my co-chair, David Heckler, who will sort of take things from here and will more properly introduce Rita and more properly introduce the topic for today.
Thanks, Chris. So we're all being recorded. Again, if you don't want to be recorded, you can cover the camera on your, your whatever device you're using, screen, laptop, desktop. And if you don't want to have your voice recorded during question and answers at the end, you can remain mute. As a matter of fact, all of you, except for Chris and I right now, are mute. If you bring your cursor down to the bottom of the screen and see on the far left, there's a microphone. If you click on that, it will unmute you when the time comes. But first, we're going to, as we do almost every time, we're going to have our guest speak for about 10 minutes or so. In this case, she can talk about the International Association of Privacy Professionals, which, as Chris said, is a 50% leap in their membership just in the year 2018, which was an amazing year for privacy professionals. And we prepared some questions for her to discuss in case, even with unmuted microphones, you didn't have a million things you wanted to talk about. These are just suggestions. If you have things you really want to talk about, you will direct the conversation. But she'll talk about the IAPP, something about her job, all the different services the IAPP offers. And in addition to being, the three roles, the DPO, the research director, and the GC of IAPP, she has a background in IP law, and she has also served as the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs and the Director of the Center of Law at the Center for Law and Innovation at the University of Maine School of Law. She's taught courses there. She continues to teach there. So she's extremely articulate and knowledgeable about this subject. And she's our special guest on Valentine's Day. What more could we ask for? Okay, Rita, please.
Well, okay. Thank you very much. 10 minutes, huh? All right. I'm not going to promise you 10 minutes, especially since I have to look at myself in full screen view. So maybe I'll look out the window. Thanks for having me. It's a real honor to be here. I am brand new to being in-house counsel. Actually, the general counsel role is my most recently added responsibility at the IAPP as of about 5 or 6 months ago. So what I am more familiar with is being the privacy officer for the IAPP. And even before that, my first job here was as research director. So if you could just indulge me for a minute, I want to explain the IAPP and my roles here as a way of sort of warming us up to what I hope we're going to talk about today. So for those of you who don't know, the IAPP, which stands for the International Association of Privacy Professionals, is a membership association, much like the American Bar Association or any other association that people who specialize in a particular field would join. And like any other association, we offer our members all sorts of good things, we hope. Chiefly content. And so one of the responsibilities I have here as research director is to help create content for our members that is, again, hopefully helpful for you if you're in privacy to do your job. We survey our members and ask them all sorts of questions about what it's like to be primarily an in-house privacy officer, how many people on your team, what you get paid, what your budget is, what are the issues that you're most struggling with in privacy, especially in light of the GDPR and now with the California law coming online. And then we report out to our members, oh, this is what your colleagues are facing in their jobs. This is what their budgets look like. This is how much their staff has changed or grown over the prior year, and sort of what an in-house privacy pro is like. But in addition, we also have an entire section of our membership that is just for lawyers. We are only not quite 50% made up of attorneys. Our membership to date is over 47,000 globally. We're in all over the world. Obviously, our number one membership base is here in the United States, but our European membership has grown exponentially in the last few years, and we are very actively offering content geared toward Europe in the form of our reports and our online materials. But very specifically, in addition to all that good stuff you can read about and the tools that we provide for you, we offer a certification, a credential. And this is something that, being in academia and thinking that the most important credential you can ever have is a degree conferred by an academic institution, and I still think they're very important, of course. It was a new concept to me to think about layering onto my JD another signal that I have a specialty in a field, that I know more about a certain area of law than others. I never certainly sought one of those in intellectual property. I don't even know if they have them. But the IAPP quite a long time ago realized that in the tech space, credentials that are offered by these third-party organizations are really the best way to show an employer that you've done your homework and you've studied and you're prepared to pass an exam on a particular area of law. It's a big deal, as many of you know, for information security people and all of the IT folks to have certifications offered by third parties. So quite a long time ago, the IAPP developed a credential for people who were working in the field of privacy, and no one had ever done that before, had defined privacy as a sufficiently professional domain that it could have its own body of knowledge, that it could have its own exams, and then ongoing education to maintain the certification. So the IAPP offers a Certified Information Privacy Professional, a CIPP credential, and then there are flavors. So there's the US flavor, Europe flavor, Canada, and Asia. And there are other certifications the IAPP has developed to match the fact that privacy isn't just knowing the law, but it's also how you build a program within an enterprise. So Certified Information Privacy Management, metrics, accountability, those sorts of things. And then Certified Information Technologist, which is for more of an IT flavor, how you as a technology person implement privacy by design and other sort of technical aspects of privacy. And those credentials have been wildly popular. And through the credentialing process as a business, the IAPP is able to maintain relationships with people for a very long period of time, because to keep your credential alive, you have to get, just like your bar license, you have to maintain your certified privacy education. So then that's the other piece of the business, which is in order to maintain your knowledge of privacy, to stay abreast of all the changes, the IAPP has web conferences and events and white papers, access to a lot of information. So full circle back to where I started, member benefits are knowledge and information, but also networking and community, and finding not just jobs, but people who have a similar position to you with a similar company that you can reach out to, and our events are very popular for that sort of networking and education function. So that's the IAPP. It's my first job in a non-law environment. So it went from a clerkship to law firms and then to law school. And now I'm in a company, and all of you know what that's like, but it was brand new to me to have all these weird titles, manager, director, VP, all that's very strange. It takes some acclimation. The research director role is very subject matter expertise, kind of nerdy. I work with lawyers, that felt familiar. But when the CEO asked me to become the privacy officer for the IAPP, He was brilliant because he didn't offer me a raise. He simply said, I know, why don't you be our DPO, which is Data Protection Officer in light of GDPR, and that will make you even better at being Research Director, because now you will know what privacy professionals do in-house, and it will, will help your other job. Isn't that good for you? And I was like an idiot. I'm like, okay. So I said yes, and I became the IAPP DPO, and it was a massive change. In my job function. I went from having my little tiny horizontal function all across the enterprise in what they do every day. So I have to know how marketing makes decisions, and I have to interact with members who are complaining about a surprise email they received that they weren't expecting. I have to sit with IT a lot, because it turns out all of our solutions are with IT. It's either how we build our user interface to make sure that we get consent before we use data for a certain purpose, or it's how we display things in a way that's most transparent. All of these things interconnect, and you can't function without IT building the tool for you and making it accessible to the user and really privacy focused. The good news is that because privacy is in our brand, literally, it's part of our name, I have a really receptive audience with everyone at the company. They are, other than salespeople, they just want to make their commission, right? But they get that sometimes you slow down, do things, at the pace that's privacy sensitive, and they usually come along. But everyone else is absolutely wonderfully on board with the IAPP. Building our systems, we hope to be as conservative and beyond compliant, and to model privacy sensitivity and how we collect and use data, and then to be transparent about it and the way we explain it back to our members. So that's been a good bonus to be a privacy person at the Privacy Association. And then lastly, my last little piece of this is that the IAPP is a small company as companies go. We have fewer than 200 employees still, although that will probably be changed by the end of the year. We have so many more deals than ever before because of the number of people who want to buy what we have to sell. And so it was overwhelming our CFO, who had to sign all the contracts and review them and work with outside counsel. And so my boss again came to me. This time he gave me a little raise, and he said, will you be our GC too? I said yes. So now, in addition to the work that I do on privacy as a specific subject matter, I'm also reading a bunch of contracts. So I feel like that's what a GC does, is reads a bunch of contracts. Like, I thought it was much more sexy and exciting than that, and it isn't any more sexy and exciting than that. So, so we can talk about GC, but for me, privacy is more interesting. It's more dynamic. It's more collaborative and problem solving so far. So we'll see. What you guys can tell me what I can look forward to as GC that I haven't run across yet. So that's the IAPP and a little bit about my role here. And I think I'd rather stop talking and go to the interactive feature, Chris and David, if we can.
Great. Well, I canceled the spotlight video, so you're no longer full screen, so you'll be happy to hear that. Thank you for that very informative message. A brief plug for In the House. We do have a monthly meetup for general counsel, especially at smaller legal departments, including a lot of solo GCs, Rita. So if you'd like to participate in that, just let me know. And we're a lot of things, but we're in part a GC support group. So we, and some of us are newer to the GC world than others. So some have been GCs for decades, and others are brand new GCs like you, and everybody in between. So it's kind of a let your hair down, casual group. So you're welcome to join anytime. Just let me know. And David, should I screen share the questions to get
not yet?
Started?
Let me say a couple
Okay.
things, and we'll wait a minute. I just want to remind people two things. This video will be available on the website. If you go to our particular page for Cybersecurity and Privacy Working Group, pretty soon there'll be a link to this video for the people who can't stay for the entire session or the people who had to miss it entirely, it'll always be there. And I did an interview with Rita that covers a lot of ground that I recommend that we published in Cyber Insecurity News in December. And we'll have a link to that too, to make it easy for you to get that. I'm amazed, actually, now that I think about it, that the IAPP went as long as it did without a privacy officer. That is kind of remarkable. And I want to ask you, Rita, because you talked to me about this in the interview, what percentage of your membership, the International Association of Privacy Professionals, have a JD, and what percent don't?
Okay, well, in order for me to answer that question accurately, we would need to collect a lot of data about our members. And we don't. We actually practice data minimization. We do not require our members to give us every aspect of their biography. So we have to make guesses about our membership, and our estimate is that about 40% are attorneys. That doesn't mean they have a JD. As many of you know, lawyers outside of the United States have other degrees. So I would say a very small percentage actually have a JD, maybe 25%, maybe 30%. But I think it's well known that privacy practice is not exclusively a lawyer function. A lot of what I do is definitely interpret the law and try to manage a factual situation to be consistent with and compliant with the law. There's no question about that. But just as much of what I do is listen to people who are worried about a problem and feel like they're not empowered to solve it for themselves. And that's one of the things that I find very interesting about working in a business environment is that people are, just like in law firms and in law schools, they're still very hierarchy challenged, and they don't necessarily think they can take a problem to somebody else. And so I sometimes provide just a translator function, like they can tell me things and I'll help get it done, which is really weird. I would think most people would feel that they're empowered regardless of their title, but it's not always true. So I'm a listener and a communicator and a problem solver, as much as an attorney, and I'm sure that resonates with everybody on this call. But quick footnote, it's not as though the IAPP was not paying attention to privacy before I took over the DPO role. I just don't think it had been as professionalized. I mean, I'll use that word on purpose. We had someone who had a role and paid attention to it and did some risk assessments, but I don't think she personally was very empowered in her job. She did not have a JD. Our CEO does, and he was a privacy professional before he started the IAPP. And I think, honestly, the dynamics were that she didn't feel that she was as capable as he was as making these decisions, and she may not have felt like she could, push through massive change. I felt like I was given full authority to really, start a program and call meetings and take control and help people make hard decisions that they didn't want to make because I said we need to do it this way. That might be my personality, but I think having the JD and giving advice to clients for years, people look to you to make a decision and help them make a decision, and I didn't feel shy about that. So yeah, there's dynamics with who you appoint for this role that make a big difference as to how strong your privacy program is.
Chris asked a question right before we started our meeting that ended up, you started answering, and it was a particularly good one. DPO, all of a sudden there's an explosion of DPOs in companies. And Chris asked, well, is it always data protection officer or is it sometimes a data privacy officer? And you had a very interesting answer. And I think that goes along with what you're talking about here about the expansion of the role. Do you want to talk about that a little bit for our whole audience now?
Sure. So as many of you know, the General Data Protection Regulation, the EU GDPR, requires companies, organizations to have a DPO. This is one of the first laws that we're aware of, other than the laws in Germany, which have for quite a while required that there be DPOs within organizations. But to actually require companies to appoint a person, either inside or outside the organization, who is an expert in GDPR is a pretty big leap for a law. It's telling you have to have someone responsible, forcing you to have a certain line item in your budget and a human being with a certain role. And of course, since we are the organization for those people, we think this is a great development, so that it's legally mandated that you have a privacy pro. But it is a legally required function with legal responsibilities that you can read about in Article 37 of the GDPR. And there are restrictions on that person's role that are very important to lawyers. For example, an actual DPO under the GDPR is not allowed to have any conflicts of interest. So they can have other job functions within the company, but those should not be functions that might lead them to a position where they're conflicted about advising the company on its privacy responsibilities. So it wouldn't be a good idea, for example, to have your marketing director also be your privacy officer, your DPO. Any function that really touches and makes decisions with and about data on a daily basis, the enterprise's data is not necessarily the best one legally under the GDPR to serve as the DPO. And there have been all sorts of very rich conversations about whether your in-house counsel is conflicted about being the DPO, because the DPO's job officially under the GDPR is not just to represent the client, the company, and its best interests. It's actually to be the voice for the consumer, for the data subject, to come to meetings as if you are the person whose data is being analyzed and say, no, I don't want you to do that on my behalf, and to advocate for the data subject. And lastly, if there is a sense that the company is not following the law, to actually communicate this to the regulator. And I know most lawyers are not in the habit of telling on their clients, but that the DPO role, very technically, if you're following the GDPR, has a bit of an observer status, like the fisheries observers from the National Marine Fisheries Service. You're on the vessel, making sure that the captain is following all of the fisheries laws. Well, that's the DPO inside an enterprise if you're strictly complying with GDPR. So very uncomfortable for some lawyers to be in that position, and I totally understand. I think what a lot of American companies are doing, and it could be some European companies as well, they read the requirements of the GDPR as not strictly applying to them. They don't officially monitor data subjects on a large scale. They're not a public authority. There are other reasons why they don't technically legally have to have a DPO, but they also appreciate that data subjects need someone to communicate with, to exercise their access rights, to exercise their rights to deletion, or to object to processing. And if these rights apply to people in Europe, and Europeans are used to seeing that a company has a DPO, that's the person they complain to or they seek help from, then having a DPO is a good role for you to have to reach out to your European customers. So it's cute to have a DPO, but then actually their legal title, their official title is Data Privacy Officer, and you can still use the acronym, you can still have the email address. It looks good to your European customers, but you're not saying that this is an official Article 37 DPO, who, by the way, under European law can't be fired for the advice that they give. That doesn't work very well under American law and customs, and so I think the American version is to put the word privacy in place of protection, and it's cute, but it works.
I'm going to read a couple of questions that have been asked from the audience in a chat here, but I just want to let you know that you can unmute yourself if you want to speak directly to any of us by taking your cursor down to the bottom of the screen, left-hand side, bottom, there's a microphone, you can unmute. But in order, Kirk Snyder said, does IAPP have a local or regional chapters?
Yes, we do. We have, I think, 107 chapters. We call them knowledge nets. The IAPP, unlike the American Bar Association and other associations you might be familiar with, though, is really very centralized. So this is like confession time. Almost all of the decisions are made at corporate headquarters. We don't, delegate decision making to our members. So we don't feel like a chapter like you might normally feel, where you would get together and you would have minutes, and it's not like that. Instead, there are chairs of knowledge nets, and maybe quarterly, maybe twice a year, maybe even only annually, they'll just have a meeting, and it'll be an event at someone's law firm, usually with cocktails and a speaker, and it will just be a networking opportunity and not really a chapter or a chapter meeting. So if you're looking to get involved locally, I would look for a knowledge net and look up who the chair is, or shoot me an email and I'll find that person for you in whatever city you're in. And it's more about networking and knowledge sharing and less about governance.
Evan Slavitt asked, has IAPP been recognized in any way in the EU? Are the certifications acknowledged as evidencing expertise?
Yeah, that's great. Our certifications are accredited by the American National Standards Institute, ANSI, and ANSI is one of the many bodies that is complies with the ISO certifications for professional certification. So it's ISO accredited through ANSI. ANSI has a sister organization, the British Standards Institute or something, and so our ANSI accreditation is translatable to European accreditation under the BSI. I'm getting my acronyms all mixed up. Just recently, some of the data protection authorities in Europe are beginning to want to offer certifications to their country people, including, for example, the French Data Protection Authority, the CNIL, is actually actively looking for an organization to offer certified data protection officer credentials. And those will be the unique credentials under French law. And so, of course, the IAPP is determined to be the organization that can credential DPOs in France using our exams. So that's the only country that I know of that has that process in place and is actively asking the IAPP to apply to certify French DPOs. Spain has a program in place, and I can't tell you if our credentials are officially recognized, but I would say it's quite clear that we're the leading credentials in Europe for people who want to serve the DPO function. But I say one more thing about accreditation. So it was a painful process, but the IAPP got accredited by the American Bar Association so that attorneys can be privacy law specialists under their rules of model conduct. You have to apply to the IAPP and have a couple of our credentials and prove that you've been actively practicing privacy law, but in up to 25 states, I think that allows you to claim that you're a specialist in privacy law per the ABA's accreditation. So that's good too.
Sounds like a very dynamic situation. Things are really happening now. So as you predicted, 2018 was really big until 2019. Sounds like it's going to be another really big year, not just for your organization, but in privacy. Lisa Popadic, I hope I pronounced that right, said, due to the potential conflicts that you already referenced, isn't it true that many companies will use a DPO service or hire someone outside the company on purpose to avoid those kinds of conflicts?
Yeah, it's a pretty big market. I think it's a bigger market right now in Europe than it is in the US. Obviously, everything GDPR focused is bigger in Europe than in the US. My impression is that US companies, if they are not appointing someone in-house, are really just using their outside counsel to help them with compliance decisions. I have not seen a lot of external DPO consulting programs in the US. I mean, if they might exist within sort of the big four consultants. I haven't seen law firms really launch DPO roles specifically. It might not work very well for law firms in the US to have the DPO role because it wouldn't be the practice of law. So, but it is very actively a business area for attorneys and non-attorneys in Europe for sure.
Well, I did an interview with a lawyer named Jason Strait, who works at United Lex. And you can, if you go to the Cyber Insecurity News and you look under the category in the left-hand frame of privacy, if you click on that, there's an interview with Jason Strait from United Lex, and he talked about this, and he's a lawyer, and he's their chief privacy officer, and his company offers DPO services as a service, an outside service, for this very reason, or one of the reasons.
Jason's awesome.
Yeah. There's another question up on the chat, and again, we're going to make this available to everyone. You don't have to type your question in the chat, but if it works for you, it works for us.
Although I will put my thumb on the scale a little bit as the founder of the group. I would love to hear someone else's voice. Nothing against David or Rita, but I would love it to be a little more interactive. If someone wants to,
don't want to ignore the chat question. So, how much is membership, and how are tests given at the IAPP, Rita?
Annual membership is, I think, $275 US dollars. For a person, for an individual, and exams are offered online through testing centers. We have just switched over to Pearson. I'm sure you all have heard of Pearson. If they're the massive textbook company, and so they actually host the exam technically, and you can take it from any of their test centers.
Here's the last question in chat, and if you want to comply with the strictures of our co-host, unmute yourself and ask yourself. But here's Shlomo Motion asked, what is the prospect for an attorney getting into privacy and cybersecurity law without prior experience in this area? We can assume, for argument's sake, that such an attorney has IAPP US certification. So suppose you're certified. Does that give you a pretty good chance of getting hired or starting a business?
Yeah, I think having the certification is a way to make sure that your resume is has a big flag on it that says I'm taking this seriously. I've spent some time on this. I think if you're already in-house, it just totally depends on your organization. Maybe your organization is so small they haven't even really taken this seriously yet, and so it's an opportunity to say, I'd like to add privacy to my portfolio, and I have this credential. Let me build a program, and if you can get the green light to do it, you can then develop real experience and use that later if you wanted to lateral to another firm. I think in the law firms, my impression is that the really big multinational law firms or national law firms, even regional law firms, probably have practice groups in this space, but there are plenty of law firms that are not paying attention, and they really should, and they don't want to. They're afraid of it. And so there's huge opportunity for anyone who says, I'm not afraid of privacy, I think it's fascinating, I'll take those clients, to just begin to do internal CLEs, work on teaching your colleagues about how important it is in the dynamic area of law. I would hurry and do it now, because if and when we get federal legislation, all of a sudden everyone will claim to be a privacy expert. So the sooner you actually grab that market share, if you will, the better.
Okay, does anyone else have a question you'd like to ask right now, or a discussion topic you'd like to bring forward for all of us to think about? If not, Chris, this would be a good time. Oh,
I think we may have one.
Okay.
Please introduce yourself if your name's not on the screen.
Good morning. I'm Heather Atkinson from Los Angeles. And I noticed Rita's disclaimer, or kind of disclaimer, for the sales department, which is kind of the big unspoken problem in the room. That's where all the potential risks are, correct? And it just seems to me, because I work with a number of salespeople online, small enterprises, small businesses, and they're collecting an awful lot of data because they're trying to customize services. And increasingly, as the economy moves into kind of a freelance space where everybody's an entrepreneur and everybody wants to know what their clients really want, what makes my service better than yours, how to distinguish themselves from the competition. I am just thinking that the legal system is not going to be moving fast enough, and that there's going to be a whole set of, I don't want to say bottom tier businesses that are not going to be able to afford the regulations, implementing the regulations. And, that's really where the big risk is. You can talk about Facebook, Google, but the people who are using Facebook and Google, those are the places where I think that there's most risk. Can you comment on that?
Let me just comment on what I do know. What I know is that people who work for a salary for an organization, I think at the end of the day, really want the organization to thrive and are more interested in the brand consistency. But if you put someone in a position where something that they sell will be less valuable to the purchaser, and therefore they won't be able to sell it, and therefore they won't get a commission or a salary, it's very personally stressful to them. So in the case of any product that is sold because there's a data exchange involved, a sponsorship, for example, or those sorts of things, I don't know what kind of companies you work with or represent, but you're right, a lot of enterprises acquire data or sell data. It's just part of the way that they were built. And as the California law comes online and makes you really think hard about whether when you give your customers' information to a third party, that is a sale of information, you might change your sales practices. You might sell fewer things on purpose because you find that it's more important to you not to have an opt-out sale button, blaring on your website, depending on what kind of company you are. That's going to hurt someone's commissions. That's going to be personal, where it wasn't before. Before marketing communication with the canned spam laws and other laws, they're an adjustment that you make to how you operationalize. You might have some restrictions on your marketing, but you can kind of figure out how to overcome that. You can change your marketing strategy. If you can't sell data anymore, that's gonna hurt someone at the bottom line. There's an adjustment phase. So I guess that's kind of why I picked up the sales issue, is because it's often directly tied to one person or several persons' compensation versus a corporate-wide bottom line decision making. And so, yeah, the smaller the enterprise, the harder it is to let go of a revenue line. This is going to be a big deal for publishers that rely on ad services for their revenue streams. They're selling data. They're selling eyeballs. The internet was built on eyeball sales. I think that would be true of any small business that is using web-based communication and advertising sales. They're going to have to either not comply with the CCPA and hope to get away with it, not do business in California, or change their business model.
Okay, that answered your question. We're still getting a lot of questions through the chat.
I've got a question, if I may.
Sure. Who are you?
This is Kirk Snyder in Denver, Colorado. To me, this data privacy issue is a two-part thing. One is proactive, helping a client prepare the verbiage and the systems and the buttons on the web page and so forth. But the other part is responding once there has been a data breach. And that response in Colorado is 30 days of notification. GDPR is much shorter time. And it seems to me that the service that we as legal professionals with some interest in data privacy can really go deeper and farther than just helping write some policies and the proactive stuff. Helping an organization figure out a legally defensible protocol for understanding, have they been hacked? Has there been a data breach? And then how do you identify individuals within all of your data, whether it be structured or unstructured data, that you have to provide notice to, and create that list of the individuals and their email addresses and the notification that you're going to send out and so forth is really a big deal. And that's where in Colorado, if there's more than 500 residents involved, you have to notify the Attorney General. And I know California has a similar, kind of requirement. I think the help that we can give is far deeper than just the proactive stuff. That's my point.
Okay. Does anyone else want to ask a question live from the audience, or shall I read some more chat questions? We have, I think, 3 more. Okay, I'll read one. This is a pretty easy one. How is the federal privacy legislation effort looking today? I hear mixed results.
Yeah, there's a hearing coming up in a couple weeks. So to go over privacy legislation that's proposed. I have a confession, which is that I'm not spending every day obsessing about the latest bill and where it is. I have read summaries of all the current legislation, but I actually have so much work to do here. I'm not sure what today's hottest proposed law is. Everyone's talking about Senator Rubio's. But I think, our CEO pegs the odds at 70% that we'll have a preemptive federal law this year. I guess I'm not sure of that. I think that's a long shot because it's so hard to get this one right. I mean, you have consumers advocating for a lot of rights, and you have enterprises who don't want to get themselves all tied up having to do GDPR level compliance. But you have the big tech who do want to do GDPR level compliance because they already are. So for them, it's more consistent to have the guidelines be very clear. You have the question that I think is slowly gaining traction, that we've segmented our privacy universe by industry. And that just doesn't make sense anymore. Like financial data and health data, and there's certain children, there's all these different rules depending on either who the customer is or what the data is, and it's sort of almost irrelevant now. Financial institutions are handling all sorts of information that isn't just the typical Gramm-Leach-Bliley information, and doing deals and working with consumers in a variety of ways. And there are a number of institutions who look more like financial institutions than they used to. And so are they covered by it's just a big mess. So having a single comprehensive consumer privacy law makes a lot of sense, but it topples a lot of existing regimes, including interfering with states' rights. I just think it's not a 70% chance. It might still happen, but there's so much work to be done to come up with something that really is as comprehensive and as sort of one-stop shoppy as the GDPR. I can't imagine in this Congress we can get there easily in 1 year. So we'll see. I would not ignore state law right now. I don't think we can afford to just say, oh, it's all going to go away by the end of the year.
Just a quick note on timing. So we officially usually run these from 12 to 12:50. I'm able to stay till 1, but I don't know about Rita's time, or I could even stay a few minutes after. But I wanted to make sure, give Rita that opportunity to tell us whether she could stay for a few more questions.
Sure.
Wonderful. I had a quick follow-up to what you just said, which is, does the IAPP have a lobbying arm, or do you guys stay on the sidelines when it comes to those types of things?
Completely policy neutral. We do not advocate for anybody or anything. We are not funded by corporations to take a position or by individuals to take a position. If we advocate for anything, which we don't, we're a 501c6, totally policy neutral. It's merely that people who perform the privacy function internally, get paid well and are respected and are promoted and have a direct line to the board of directors. And, we're championing the position, the profession, but we don't lobby at all, not on law.
Great. Good to know. Thank you.
Now, the question about privacy legislation at the federal level was from Jonathan Perkel. I neglected to credit him. DeSantis from New Mexico, that's the only identification here, says...
I think that's Nicole DeSantis.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, David and Chris.
Hello.
Yeah,
Do you want to ask it yourself, Nicole?
Sure.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
This is my first time on the webinar, and I just actually recently joined in the House, so
Thank
I'm
you.
glad to be here. But yeah, my question was a super practical one. And by the way, I'm not in New Mexico. That NM stands for my name, so I'm in New York City.
Okay, sorry.
Work for a large bank. But my question was actually more on a personal level. You know, I recently joined the board of a nonprofit. And I find myself, you know, in my own professional capacity, I know the scope of the GDPR, I know the scope of the CCPA and how to go through it with the legal questions I get in-house. But here I am now in a position to advise a very small company that does business in certain specific states. I'm thinking, I should know this, and I could easily, I guess, go out and find different language. But I'm wondering, Rita, if IAPP has certain forms that members are free to use in terms of like template privacy verbiage. And specifically, since we don't yet have any unified privacy laws on the federal level, how there might be differences in each state, how they approach those kind of disclosures.
So your question broke up a little bit from my perspective. I couldn't hear the whole thing, but the answer is yes and no. If you are a member of the IAPP, you can use everything for the most part that we have for free. Is it all that you need? No, I wish it were. It's an ongoing struggle for us to keep up, just like it is for everybody. So we do our best to produce whatever materials we can for people, but we are also fully aware of the fact that the universe is full of great information, a lot of it coming from law firms or other organizations. So to the extent we can, we'll also point you in the direction of where else you can find helpful information. I think the question that we're hearing a lot, and I think we'll be holding a webcon on this issue this year because it came up in a privacy bar section web conference proposal call, and that is the one that you just raised. How do I have a global privacy system? How do I build something that works everywhere, and can I even do that? So I know that this is an issue everyone's struggling with, which is to say there isn't an answer yet. And I think the best we can do is try to connect you with people who are also struggling with that question. And if we have forms or other things in our resource center, they're totally available to all our members. But if we don't, you send us a note, and we know that that's an issue to help you resolve. We'll go find it.
Okay, great, thank you.
Anyone else?
I did have a quick follow-up to that, which is would it be reasonably correct to say that if you comply with GDPR, are you at the sort of highest level of compliance? Would you also comply with California, Colorado, et cetera, or can you not sort of say something that simplistic?
I'm sure everyone else has a thought on this, so jump in. It's a great start. If you had done all the work of data inventory and mapping and building risk assessment processes and having subject access requests that are visible, having a person in-house to answer all these questions, being able to delete data at request, deleting it, by the way, I love Colorado's approach, having a whole mechanism for getting rid of stuff is one other comment I want to make. The other, not only can we help with breach response, but to help our clients not keep data that they don't need anymore is a huge asset to them. That's not there for litigation discovery. It's not there for subject access discovery. It's not there to be breached. I think those are huge steps that get you a long way down the road with California. But California, unfortunately, has a few new curveballs that GDPR doesn't have. I'd just point out a couple of them. One, obviously, the restriction on sale of data is huge. And the other one is that the definition of personal information includes inferences drawn from information. And I think it's a bit outside of the GDPR scope of personal data. And it gets into all sorts of interesting questions about whose data, what's the data subject's data, and what's enterprise data, data that we've determined because we've run some algorithms on our member data or customer data, and we have this sort of secret sauce. Well, does CCPA make that secret sauce belong to the individual, or is it? So you're not quite there with GDPR. You still, unfortunately, have a few more existential moments under CCPA.
Sounds like someone was trying to ask a question just a minute ago. David, was that you?
Yeah, that was me. I was wondering, Rita, if you could say something about the U.S. European data shield, which seems to be some sort of like a safe harbor for U.S. companies. to join or to comply with, so that then it's almost as if the authorities in Europe will then say, oh, you're doing that, okay, well, you know, you're okay. But the problem with that is that it's kind of expensive for smaller companies. And so I'm wondering if there are ways that smaller U.S. companies can comply with GDPR without, for instance, joining the data shield or being part of that.
Right. So for those of you who may not be aware, the U.S. Privacy Shield is the official name of a relationship between the U.S. government and the European Commission that allows the U.S. sort of self-regulatory model that we've abided by for years and years. And companies can voluntarily sign up to follow principles that are set out by the Federal Trade Commission and sign up for this program called Privacy Shield. And by committing to this program, they're submitting themselves to the jurisdiction of the FTC. And if they fail to live up to those principles, or they lie about being in the program, the FTC now has an enforcement action against all of the enterprises who claimed to participate in the program. The reason you would do it is that you now have in place adequacy, essentially, for purposes of receiving data from Europe into your company. Because otherwise the United States is not deemed to have adequacy as having proper privacy and data protection laws. So you can sort of individually as a company, even though you're inside the United States, be deemed adequate safeguards for data, and you can exchange data with Europe at will. And it saves you from binding corporate rules and from standard contractual clauses and from all the other nonsense that you have to go through to transfer data. If you are disinclined to voluntarily submit yourself to the FTC through Privacy Shield, you're too small for binding corporate rules. Standard contractual clauses work for some transactions, but not for working one-on-one with your customer. What do? Well, that's where the IAPP is. We're a not-for-profit, so we aren't FTC anyway, and we're not about to submit to the FTC if we don't have to. That would not be a good risk decision, I don't think. So we can't use Privacy Shield even if we wanted to. We have to rely a lot on derogations. We have to take a rather risky position with data exchange with Europe. We use standard contractual clauses every time we transfer data with a vendor, with a processor, or another data controller. But with our one-on-one membership relationships, we can't do business with those people unless they agree to transfer their data to the United States. And in order to fulfill their request for services from us, we have to export their data to the US. It's just reality, and we're glad the derogations exist. And if there is a code of conduct or certification mechanism that I can help the IAPP comply with that works for our organization, I would totally take advantage of that. But I haven't seen one built to our specs yet that really works for our enterprise, its size, or its industry. So, we're just getting by until that comes along.
There's one more question that maybe you can handle quickly, and it'll have to be our last because we're out of time. But from Thomas Seaman, he says, for those companies for those members who are at companies where they just can't afford to hire an outside lawyer, and they've got these GDPR requirements and CCPA, what are they supposed to do to figure out how to implement, compliance without an outside counsel? Can you recommend any other resources besides your own that might help guide them?
One of the best places for information is the UK Information Commissioner's Office, the ICO website, ico.uk.org. It is a brilliant, in English, obviously plainly worded guide to complying with data protection law in Europe. And I think if you built something to the ICO's instructions, follow their guidelines as best you can, you're going to be doing more than 99% of the U.S. companies, certainly small ones are. So it's free, right? It's in English. It's very well written, very well organized, constantly updated. It's just a great resource. And I think I would recommend anyone in the world who's trying to live up to EU law to just use the ICO's website as one tool among many.
I just posted the link to the ICO guide, so anyone that wants it can click on the chat window, pull that up, and I recommend you download it. That's a good idea.
Great help with direct marketing guidance, which I think is the #1 places where organizations get in trouble. It's very useful. I look at it all the time.
That was a great session, and our chat people reflect that. I think it's pretty unanimous. Thank you so much, Rita Heimes,
Thanks for having me.
being our guest.
Thank you, Rita. I really appreciate it. Anybody that wants to get in touch with either David or me, we're easy to find. And you can always participate in our events or join our community for those who haven't already. We're just at www.inthehouse.org. And we'll hope to see many of you at next month's session. Thanks again, Rita. It was a wonderful presentation. Thanks for all the work that you do on behalf of privacy professionals and would-be privacy professionals. Appreciate it. Bye. Bye, everybody.